Hi, everybody. Today is Wednesday, April 23rd, 2025, and our friend Laith Marouf is back with us. Welcome back.
Great to be with you, Nima.
Laith, let, let's get started with what's going on in Gaza. We know that Israel is attacking Gaza, and I watched a video footage that shows that Israelis are getting attacks. Israeli soldiers, it seems that Palestinian Gazans are responding or attacking back, and they're trying to defend themselves. What's going on from what we're witnessing right now in Gaza, and how do you find Hamas today?
Yeah, I mean, there was two videos that were released over the last 2 days. One of them of the resistance in Gaza coming out of tunnels in an area that's supposed to have been under control of the Zionists for a long time, and also the Israeli military has shown videos destroying the tunnels supposedly in that area. And so we saw these Hamas fighters coming out of the ground and targeting Israeli tanks and APCs and jeeps with the anti-tank, kind of RPGs that they have, the Yasin shells, and that's one video. The other video we watched is of Hamas fighters going head-to-head in close-range combat with an Israeli special force stationed inside a building, and the building being blown up with the soldiers inside it. So the Israelis up until now have admitted the death of two of their soldiers. That's clearly from the videos is not reasonable. Clearly from the videos we can see that there's much more casualties. And this shows you that the military battle is not over. Israel can continue to massacre civilians as it's doing. That's the other thing that we're seeing every day right now is the Israeli Air Force targeting tents of refugees with everyday videos of Palestinian children being burnt alive, being broadcasted on our social media. So that's the only thing that the Israelis have been able to do over the last 17, 18 months now. Nothing more than just genociding unarmed civilians. And when it comes to the battle with Hamas and the Palestinian resistance, Israel has no achievements to tell anyone about. And given that no change in the strategy of Israel has occurred over the last 17 months, we all have to conclude that the actual strategic objective of this military operation in Gaza for the Israelis is purely the genocide of the Palestinian population.
We had Hamas declaring that they're ready for a permanent ceasefire. Do you think that would be supported by Muslim world, and how we can talk about Iran, Turkey, all Arab states? How are they going to be able to help Hamas if that would be the policy on their part? We know that whatever they're talking about Gaza, whenever they're talking about Gaza, they're talking about it is we have to follow the official policy of Hamas. Right now, Hamas he says that they're ready for a permanent ceasefire. I can understand that they're trying to put some sort of pressure on Israel politically, but how do you find it?
Yeah, this is not the first time that Hamas agreed to a permanent ceasefire or offered a permanent ceasefire. This is also not the first time that Hamas agrees to whatever conditions are handed to it by the Qatari and Egyptian negotiators. And clearly, it will be the answer from the Zionists is clear every time over the last 17 months that they refuse these ceasefires. So I think Hamas is continuing to show that it's willing to end this war as long as we can save the Palestinian population and bring in aid and medicine to and reconstruction material to the Gaza Strip. And the Zionists are choosing to have a zero-sum game. They want to either a total defeat of Hamas, which is not achievable, and or the destruction of life in Gaza for the Palestinians forever. And given that there's no force on a global scale has been able to curtail the actions of the Zionist international courts, UN, what have you, and the fact that there's unlimited, unending supply of weapons, finance, and political cover by all the collective West, the Zionists are not going to stop, you see. And so we have to, all of us, prepare ourselves for that reality that this genocide is not going to be stopped if no one takes action. And I'm not talking about just demonstrations here and there and or the missiles of Yemen alone. They're not going to be able to stop the Zionists from continuing this genocide. So if and only if we see a much wider war in the region that includes Iran and the destruction of American capabilities in the region and the cutting of the supplies to the Zionist colony, then we will see an end to this genocide. This may include some rebellion in the West, which I don't put much hope in, that the populations in the West will do something to force their own governments to listen to their own opinions, because we know much of the population in the West, the vast majority of them, including in the United States, are against this genocide and against the supply of weapons to the Zionist colony. So currently we live in a world that is where might makes right, and only in force will end this genocide. There's nothing else that's going to do it.
Laith, when Israel, Netanyahu is talking about his achievements, recently he said that he was able to assassinate the leaders of Hamas, Hezbollah, and just diminish the power of Iran, the axis of resistance. But when you look at Israel today and the way that the society, as their economy and their military power, do you find Israel the same way that it was before all of this conflict started?
Well, right now, Israel clearly, for all the world can see this, is unable to exist without the direct, unending supply of weapons, money, and political support from Western capitals. The October 7th and the battles that followed showed that Israel would have been defeated easily by just militias like Hezbollah, Hamas, and Islamic Jihad. If there was no aircraft carriers and the largest naval flotilla in history since World War II arriving the weeks after the October 7th attack in the Mediterranean, 80 somewhat ships collected from NATO to threaten the Palestinians and the Lebanese and anyone that dares to challenge the Zionist colony. If it wasn't for the never-ending supply of these weapons, I mean, if one day of weapon delivery didn't happen over the last 17 months, the Zionist colony would have had to stop this war. We saw also the weakness of the Zionist military on the ground. The only thing the Zionists can do is fly from the air and bombard unarmed civilians. Whenever they're on the ground facing a enemy face to face, they run away and or are killed easily. So one more time here, I think, if there's anything good to come out of what happened over the last 17 months, is the destruction of the mythology of Zionist or Jewish supremacy in general. You know, the Western public and the world public in general over the last 60 years have been told over and over in American movies and American television shows and American news and Western news in general that, you know, Jews are better doctors, they're better engineers, they're better journalists, they're better writers, they're better musicians, they're better at martial arts than the cultures that actually have martial arts. That you know, Karmaga is better than anything that the Asians came up with. You understand what I mean? This was the mythology put forward to you know, in popular culture of the West, and that's now demolished. It's you know, remember also that the idea that Jews are the most ethical on this planet, right? Now it's clear that there is nothing superior about being Jewish. And notice that I'm not using the word Zionist because the mythology there that's put in the West doesn't differentiate. In fact, they purposefully tell us that, you know, Jews are Zionists. This is what Western media tells us. I don't believe that. I believe there's a difference. But that's what the West has been telling us. So the rest of the world and even Western populations right now have been awakened and have shaken off all this propaganda. Nobody believes that there's anything more superior about being Jewish than being any other human. And being Jewish is as fallible as any other, you know, group. That's, I think, the best thing that happened. And the world knows now that this Zionist colony cannot exist. It is illegitimate, and only force is keeping it in existence. Therefore, if we continue on this path and for another year or two, and the Palestinians are still alive, not totally genocided, there will be no Zionist colony, no matter what the West tries to do. And the more the West tries to maintain this Zionist colony by force against the will of humanity as a whole, okay, not only against the will of the indigenous people in the region here, but against the will of humanity as a whole, the more actually the West is destroying its own self and its own standing in humanity. Look at what the United States is doing right now with these mass expulsions. We don't have a real number right now, but we know at least 4,000 international students have been ordered to leave the United States. Researchers, doctors, professors also. And you know, how this is now going to cause a reverse brain migration from all these diasporas away from the United States, away from the West, because the same actions that the US is taking, other Western countries that are Zionist, like Canada and European Union countries and the UK, are going to follow. Therefore, you know, we're already seeing how much of the tourism to the United States has ceased to exist. I think the numbers of tourists in the United States currently right now are down to 25% of the usual, right? So there's going to be a total exodus of the world and from Western society. Nobody's going to want to go study there. Nobody's going to want to do vacation. People will look for alternatives for business. And eventually, any enamoration populations in Africa, Asia, and Latin America had with Western civilization or Western societies is going to disappear. In fact, there's going to be a total disgust of Western civilization in the rest of humanity. And that's you know, going to spill the end of Western hegemony for the last 600 years.
Laith, if while the United States and Iran are talking about the Iranian nuclear program, Reuters reported that Israel is considering attack on Iran. If they're capable of attacking Iran and they do feel that they can defeat Iran, why do they need the United States to fight Yemenis, to fight Ansarullah, instead of them fighting Yemen? Why do they need the United States if they're that capable of fighting a war with Iran?
Well, there's two things. One is Yemen is further than Iran to the Zionist colony. Two is the fact that Zionist Air Force to try to attack Yemen would have to fly over Saudi Arabia, which is a vassal of the West and is in bed with the Zionists, and but would not want that to happen in public because of its propaganda war against the Axis of Resistance, claiming that there's some Sunni alternative to the Axis of Resistance consisting of the Saudis or the Qataris or the Turks and the Egyptians. So they wouldn't want that to be an open situation. Most probably, currently, Israel is actually bombing Yemen. Amongst the flurry of jets that are flying, British and American, we don't have any trackers. We can't tell who's who. So most probably they are doing it, but they're going to be a junior partner in this attack on Yemen because of the distance. They're already probably doing it also to kind of experiment on their capabilities of hitting targets inside Iran. Okay. Now, saying all of this, Iran is, although the geography is similar to Yemen in terms of mountains, it is, 5 times the size of Yemen. And the locations that would need to be hit in Iran, if the Israelis would want to have a kind of a killer blow, one-time blow or whatever it is to the systems in Iran, are so scattered around the country that you would have need to fly hundreds of jets simultaneously. And it would require to fly from different directions. So targets in western or eastern Iran would have to be approached from Pakistan or Afghanistan or from the north, crossing the Caspian Sea or what have you. Targets that are in the north have to go through Azerbaijan. So it's not a realistic thing that the Israelis can accomplish this without the direct involvement of the whole Zionist empire governed from Washington, D.C. And that's why we, have to be careful. Like, look, in a situation that actually the Israelis attack Iran, there will be American and NATO jets flying, pretending to be Israeli, as has happened in the attacks on Lebanon and during the assassination of Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah and the mass bombardment of Lebanon for 2 days. It was clear that it wasn't Israel doing it alone because it doesn't have enough jets to conduct all those raids. So ultimately, if Israel attacks, it means the whole West is attacking. And the Iranian military is probably watching all the movement of American and Western military jets into the region and counting each one of them to figure out how many targets can they hit simultaneously if they all are up in the air, and what Iran has to do to avoid being attacked from all directions with these buildups of Western air power in the region.
As we talk, the Cradle reported that Yemeni armed forces announced that its missile force successfully struck an Israeli target in the Haifa area. Laith, in order to confront Yemen, to confront Ansarullah, it seems that the United States is trying to make some sort of coalition between the United States on one part and these Muslim countries, Saudi Arabia, UAE, Turkey. Even we've heard Turkey would be part of this to empower these ISIS sort of ideology in Yemen to fight Ansarullah. Do you see the capability, the capacity there to make some sort of groups against Ansarullah in Yemen?
Yeah, I mean, the attacks of the Yemenis today come on the 77th anniversary of the expulsion of the Palestinians from Haifa and the occupation of Haifa by the Zionist militias. And that's the day my family today, my mother's family, Al-Kilani family, 77 years ago, at gunpoint, were chased out of their home, put on trucks, and driven to the border of Lebanon, as the 66,000 inhabitants of Haifa also faced that reality. So the Battle of Haifa was central to the story of the Nakba and the victory of the Zionists. The British were occupying the city. They allowed the Haganah and other militias, Zionist militias, to take their positions and take their weapons as they were leaving. And they were disarming the Arabic Palestinian population and not allowing anyone to enter the city as these Zionists took it over and eventually ethnically cleansed everybody. So Yemen has been, I think, very gracious and very loving in throwing these missiles on Haifa on this anniversary. And as a descendant of family that was expelled from Haifa, I send all my thanks to the Yemeni people and the Yemeni armed, military. Now, the other part of your question was, I'm sorry, I got a little bit emotional there, so I missed it there.
Yeah, the other part would be if they're going to be able to make a new group, ISIS-like ideology to fight Ansarullah.
Yes. So, the American use of Wahhabi death squads in the Muslim countries works when the majority of the population is susceptible to this propaganda. And for instance, look at what happened in Syria. Because the vast majority of the population is Sunni, it's easier to get recruit, and it's easier for the propaganda that the Saudis and the other Gulf countries are throwing at the population to actually infiltrate their minds. In the situation of Yemen, you have a vast majority of the population being Shia, and living in the areas that Ansarullah and the Sana'a government controls. The population in the south of Yemen and the desert parts of Yemen, where the Sunni population lives, is less than 20%, if not less, of the population of all of Yemen. And so the Saudis and the Qataris and Emiratis have been trying for more than a decade, but that's not a winning formula. Depending on the minority to take over the majority is a losing battle. And that's why we have seen when the option of using ISIS and Al-Qaeda in Yemen failed, we saw the Emiratis import Sudanese fighters, import Somali fighters, and eventually, when those also failed, bring in mercenary companies like Blackwater that were on the ground, and even they were defeated. So this is, most probably the Saudis and the Emiratis and the Qataris and Israelis and the Americans are going to continue because they don't have any other option. But it's not going to change the reality on the ground. And the Saudi soldiers on the borders of North Yemen, they are all, lard, fat, alcoholic, druggies, sex addicted. They've never fought a real war. The actual army of the Saudis is Al-Qaeda and ISIS. So they, over the last 10 years, also failed to take 1 inch of north borders of Yemen. And in fact, they lost a lot of Saudi territory in that battle face to face. So the Americans, if they want to do anything on the ground of Yemen, they're going to have to do it themselves. And I don't think they will fare better, although they are like definitely better soldiers than the vassal countries in the region, the American soldiers. But this is an impossible, kind of situation because of the geography of Yemen and having to go up the mountains. You can't do an air landing in Sana'a without people being ready for you. You're going to have to come on the ground on the coast of Yemen and try go up the mountains. And no one in history, recorded history, has been able to achieve that. Go from the coast and or the south of Yemen and go up the mountains to Sana'a. No one, not one army, even the most vicious armies in human history haven't been able to do that. So what is the Americans going to do? They're going to continue bombardment from air. And as we've seen over the last 30 years, this formula of shock and awe and mass killings of civilians to subdue populations that are anti-imperialist didn't work. It didn't work in Afghanistan. It didn't work in Iraq. It didn't work in Syria. It didn't work in Lebanon, in Palestine. It's not going to work in Yemen.
And Yemen is just getting much more experienced and know how to fight the United States. You look at the MQ-9 Reaper and the number that they have so far, they could just shut down. If I'm not mistaken, it was 22 or 21. Do you think that would be a factor for Donald Trump? We know that Donald Trump is so sensitive about spending and just without having any sort of outcome, any sort of result that can be a foreseeable outcome. How do you find the United States? Are they going to continue the same failed policy that we've been witnessing for a decade, this policy, and Donald Trump is doing the same? But is this administration capable of evaluating the situation with Yemen?
Look, the United States is trying to reassert its supremacy as the hegemon in the world. And the whole world is losing respect for it and or fear of it. It wants to face off with Russia and China, but it can't do that while the rest of the world is looking down at it and its military power. Therefore, Trump has no choice but to pick some nation on this planet to make an example of. Okay, if he doesn't want to go into a direct war with Russia or China, which he can't afford, he's going to, have a public flogging of somebody, so the other nations in Africa, Latin America, Europe, and South America, and Asia, fall in line without having to attack them also, right? So unfortunately for Yemen, they are the only target right now in his crosshairs. The US is not going to attack Iran anytime soon because of the experiment of Yemen failing. And if Trump is unable to achieve anything in Yemen, I think other nations in the world should start worrying that they're going to be picked, because definitely Iran, China, and Russia are going to be the last on the kill list that the United States has. And not because the US, let's say, can't have a war with Iran and destroy it. It's because a war with Iran, a direct war with Iran, will destroy all shipping, oil and gas in the region and cut off the world economy completely. And that's going to be in itself a trigger for the involvement of China and Russia. Again, not because they want to be involved, but because reality forces them to, the fact that we have a global system of trade and relations. So I think all of humanity should be wishing that Yemen succeeds in deterring the United States. This, if it doesn't work, if the Yemenis are defeated, we all should be worried what's going to happen next. But I personally don't think they're going to be defeated. Yemen, the geography of Yemen, the capabilities that you mentioned, those air defenses that are capable to take, now it's something like 20% of all MQ-9s that the US has have been downed by Yemen. If this continues, for a few more weeks at that rate of shooting down two of those, the US wouldn't be able to fly MQ-9s over Africa or Asia or Latin America or the front lines in Ukraine. So I know it doesn't seem sometimes as significant as downing fighter jets, but the ability of the United States to be able to see the targets moving on the ground that they want to hit is dependent on things like the MQ-9. So Yemen has been, I think, blinding the United States and on behalf of the whole world, and we should applaud that.
We had the Iran Saudi defense minister going to Iran and living and delivering the letter from his father, and we know that he's the brother of Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia as well. But when you look at Saudi Arabia and the way that they're trying to communicate with Iran, it seems that they're concerned about the situation in Syria, as we've learned from Professor Marandi. They're concerned about the situation in Syria and in Lebanon. What is of concern for Saudi Arabia and Syria, in your opinion?
In my opinion, the concern that the Saudis have is their rivalry with the Turks and the Israelis over being the favorite house slave of the United States, right? So the more services and territory Turkey and or Israel control and deliver to the United States, the less of a clout the Saudis have in the kitchen of the White House. Okay, so it's an internal bickering between house slaves, and the Saudis fashioned themselves as the extension of the Arab tribes of Syria and the desert of Syria, and spent so much money on this war and sent so many Saudis, of the 200,000 Wahhabi death squads that attacked Syria, probably 40% of them were Saudi. So Saudi Arabia sees themselves as kind of given a lot, that they should have more control of this and what's happening in Syria and its resources. So that's where that rivalry is. With Turkey and and Israel, and that's why they're concerned about the situation in Syria, and that's why maybe they are negotiating with Iran on the situation in Syria. I mean, we've seen also even HTS itself talking to Hezbollah and Iran behind closed doors. We've seen even, concessions given by HTS to Hezbollah in return, for instance, the continuation of smuggling between Lebanon and Syria, because Syria currently is 100% dependent, especially border areas, on smuggling from Lebanon of gas, gasoline, and cooking gas and oil products, the least of it. On the one hand, we saw those attacks by HTS on Lebanese territory a few weeks ago. On the other, we don't see an end of the smuggling, you see. And that shows you how local considerations sometimes overweigh these international agendas of somebody in Washington, D.C. that's directing the HTS. Well, the fighters need to eat and have some cooking oil, and they're going to deal with Hezbollah. And so, there's nothing in politics that is forbidden, right? It's not as idealistic as we think it is. Even the leadership of the Saudi Arabia, although they're good house slaves, they still want to talk to Iran to have a backtracking path. The Saudis are allowing the Americans to use their territory to attack Yemen. And we all know that this is a prelude to an attack on Iran, but they still want to talk to the Iranians just in case Master in the White House is not successful in Yemen. What's going to happen? Are the Saudis going to be left hanging dry by the United States at that point if they have ruined all their relationships with Iran? So this is partially why the Saudi Minister of Defense went to Tehran. Most probably also there's another side of it, which is the, kind of sweetened threats that would be there, not to the Ayatollah, because the Saudis wouldn't be, wouldn't have the courage enough to speak in those ways to the Ayatollah, but maybe their counterparts, the other generals and Minister of Defense, talking about what will happen if the United States attacks, where Saudi will stand. So the Saudis are also really worried because they're so fragile. They don't have the ability to defend themselves without the American presence in the region. And if Iran takes out the United States presence in the region, I don't think any of these Gulf states will exist. We have to always keep in mind these realities when we're analyzing it.
Who's running the show in Syria? I'm not talking about Jolani and his people. We know that these people just they don't know how to run a country. Who's behind them? Who's giving them advices? Who's giving them the clue, that the way that they can behave, they can communicate with other countries? Is that Turkey behind the scene? Is that the United States influencing Turkey to do that? Are they getting any sort of influence from Israel, from the government in Israel? What do we know about that?
Well, the Turkish government sent a lot of advisors to Damascus. There is practically a Turkish administrator in every ministry in Damascus. There is definitely some rivalries between the different militias that are now forming this government, but they're all, mercenaries. So you pay them enough and they'll shut up. The Israelis are pressuring the Julani government, specifically on the issue of the Palestinian groups in Syria and the continuation of movement of weapons to Hezbollah in Lebanon, which is continuing, by the way. So we saw over the yesterday actually, the Palestinian Islamic Jihad announcing that its leadership, two of its leaders in Damascus, were nabbed 5 days ago or 6 days ago now, and have been disappeared by HTS. Clearly, HTS has been saying the United States is pressuring it and Israel are pressuring it about lifting the sanctions on Syria, that this wouldn't happen until the expulsion of Palestinian resistance groups from Syria and or their killing and disarmament. So we see HTS and the Julani government responding to these pressures by the Zionists, and the Palestinian groups in Syria are now underground. Palestinian Islamic Jihad and Hamas, up until now, were acting openly in Syria in hopes that because they fashion themselves as Sunni militias, that HTS and or these other groups, Al Qaeda and so on, will find some middle ground with them. But as we see, it's clear that it doesn't matter that Hamas and Islamic Jihad are Sunni. The marker that is important to HTS is, are they pro-American or not? Are they pro-Zionist or not, like Al-Qaeda and ISIS and so on? And that's why now Palestinian Islamic Jihad is suffering, and the other groups have went into hiding. The influence of the United States is indirect, because as we see the empire, with this weakening of the empire, it's allowing its regional viceroys, its regional vassals, to control more of what's happening in their neighborhood. The only thing that the U.S. requires is the cut of the loot. It's like a gangster, or like collection of mafia families. There's the top family there that's going to give freedom to each of the dons in their neighborhood, but they still have to just pay a certain tax to the top don, and that's Donald Trump and his cabal. So yes, we're seeing more of the Turkish and Israeli needs taking precedent. That's why we see now Trump talking about leaving Syria, and but this is now where the battle is starting between the two local gangsters, the Turkish government and Netanyahu's government, over control of northeast Syria. Are the United States going to let Turkey take over and quash the Kurdish hopes of annexing northeast Syria? Or are they going to let the Israelis take it over and create into an apartheid states of the Kurds there? And that's why the United States is saying, well, you know what? I'd better stay here. That's what's going to happen. The U.S. is going to stay because it doesn't want to have to, have its two local viceroys fight each other openly.
Laith, the other point that Saudi Arabia is trying to talk with Iran is the case of Lebanon. And they're concerned about Lebanon as well. It seems that they want to cooperate with Iran in the case of the communication between the government and Hezbollah. In your opinion, can they achieve something in that direction?
Yeah, I mean, the Saudis are worried again in Lebanon that they will lose influence to the Turks and the Qataris. Because it's clear that the Shia population, their international sponsor or protector is Iran. It used to be, before the fall of Syria, that the Christian population was protected by Syria. And the Saudis had influence over and protection for the Sunnis. That was the kind of deal that happened after the Ta'if agreement. Okay, now with the fall of Syria and the war in Syria over the last 15 years, there was a shift in the Christian population to take their protection from the Saudis. At the same time, the Saudis had a fight with the Hariri family here, that were the scions of the Sunnis in Lebanon, and broke up the funding for the Future Party and all the media propaganda machines that were associated with the Future Party. So the Sunnis in Lebanon were kind of orphans for the last 6 specifically years. And that's where Turkey entered the field. And we saw Turkish spending on social programs in specifically the north of Lebanon, in the Tripoli area. And now we can, when you drive around the Tripoli area, you see Turkish flags being flown. It used to be, a long time ago, it used to be Saudi flags that you'd see in Tripoli. Now it's it's Turkish flags. And with the HTS being right on the border of North Lebanon, Turkey definitely has more influence on the ground now in the Sunni population than Saudi Arabia. So the Saudis are worried that they're only holding the card of the Christians in Lebanon, which is 10-15% of the population. It's a small playing card. You don't have an ace in their pocket. So that's forcing them to try to find some formula with Iran to counter the Turkish influence in Lebanon, because also Iran doesn't want the Turkish influence there. And so you see it, politics makes strange bedfellows. But this is another one of those reminders that everybody watching this should understand, that there's no principles in politics.
Thank you so much, Laith, for being with us today. Great pleasure, as always.
Thank you, Nima. See you next week.
See you. Take care, Laith.